Nice to be here in Ukraine. Actually, it's the second time I'm here, but the previous time was about 15 years ago, where I was traveling with a group of guys having fun and seeing the world. We used to do a trip every year to different country, and we have visited most of the countries in Europe. And I did enjoy my time in Ukraine. Then I still do it when I'm now. Lots of things have changed, but lots of things are the same. People are friendly, the vodka tastes the same. I'm happy. So I usually hold talks about the MySQL and the MySQL story and why I had to create MariaDB on top of MySQL. Actually, we need some water. But with the money I got from selling MySQL, I wanted to do something good with it. With MySQL and with MariaDB, we are changing the world of that you don't have to pay for databases, and you can do much more cheaply. But I also wanted to be able to help new companies succeed and doing similar things that I was able to do with MySQL. So MySQL was one of the first really successful, commercially successful open source project. Unfortunately, what we did and the way we did doesn't work for everyone. So we have spent some time, me and David Axmark, the other founder of MySQL, of how to be able to help almost everyone who would like to work on open source actually be able to do a product that can be free, used by most, but you still get enough money so you can compete with closed source companies. So this set of slides, you will probably get a copy of it from IDCEE. And they should help you both to how to create a successful open source product and also how to make money on it. So this is one of the mantras of why open source is a better development model. And we do produce better code, but actually, even if this is probably one of the most famous quotes about open source, I don't personally agree with them, because most people don't look at the code until they have to use it much later. But I do believe that releasing something as open source creates a better product, because you get much more spread. You over time will get more people involved in it. You get better good reports. You get the product evolve in ways that you could never do in a single company. But it's still very hard to create a profitable company doing open source, because you don't usually get enough money to pay developers. And the reason is that most of the business models around open source has been focused on that you do a service around some open source product. You're basically doing consulting. But when doing consulting, you usually have a profit per consultant of about 10%. And that means if you want to have full development done to creating a product, you need 10 consultants for every developer. And most projects will over time need 10, 20 developers. So you would need to have several hundred consultants just to create the product. And then you don't do any profit. You can never do that. So this talk is about people who want to understand how open source works, how to create a project and earn money on open source, and also create a company around open source. So the top reasons why people are working on open source. I would say that the most common reason is that you want to solve a problem for yourself or your company. And that's how MySQL was initially created. I was working on databases from some of the biggest companies in Sweden. We were analyzing them, and I wrote the project to solve my own needs. It was only when I added an SQL on top of them all project that I thought that, or David and I thought that, no, we have something we can go out and give out that is useful for everyone. But initially it was to solve my own problems. Same thing with PHP. You have Rasmus Lerdorf here holding a talk, father of PHP, and he also created PHP just to solve his own issues. And other ways that open source projects are created if you have in your company a tool that you use, that you don't make money on. It makes good sense to create or release this as open source because there's no loss for you. And if it's a tool that is useful for other companies, you will get more developers on it and you can get development, testing, extensions done for free. And the other reason for why we wanted to release initially was that we thought that if we do this right, we can get something out that most people can use for free, in which case we actually help a lot of people, but a certain segment has to pay, and enough so we can work full-time on it. Because I didn't want to continue to be a consultant the rest of my life, like I was back then, where you had to do consulting during the day and programming during the night. I wanted to do full-time programming. And if we would be successful with MySQL, we could change that. And we also wanted to create a company and actually show that you can do business with open source and you can compete with the big guys. Because when I started with MySQL, everybody told me that the world doesn't need another database. There's no place in the market for it. There's no way you can succeed. And it took me 5 years to convince my friends and everybody we're working with that actually we have an idea and we didn't know what we was doing. And I would say that developing open source software is human nature. It's not because we have a lot of people who want to help each other. I have a very low opinion about human nature as a group. We are selfish, we are cheap, we only caring about doing things easy for ourselves. But open source is exactly based on those principles. You do have a couple of persons who are doing that for helping each other. But the reason that you do open source is that you solve your own problems. And that's why you are changing open source. You're using open source because you're cheap, because it's free. You don't use it initially because you think it's better, just because that's easy to get. And the reason you give back things to the community is that when you're done a change, it's very hard to keep that change up to date. You have to patch every release on software. So giving it back to the community is the logical way to get rid of the problem. And that's why open source is about evolving. And I have talked with lots of politicians and everybody else, and they have been always confused that why does open source work? Why does so many people helping each other? And they can't get their head around it. But if you explain it in these terms, they just say, oh, that works. They're like me. Selfish, only thinking about themselves, politicians. So, but before starting a new open source project, it's very important that you first look, does something similar exist? There's lots of code in open source, and usually it's much better to join a group than to try to create something yourself. So this was something that even Sun got wrong. Sun really loved open source and they wanted to participate. But they also thought that they were better than anybody else. So if they saw some cool idea in open source, instead of participate, they look at the idea, then they went to the CTO lab, created something they thought was much, much better, and then released it to the world and said that you should use this instead. And then they were surprised that they didn't get an active community around that. And people criticizing Sun that it's good that you release things open source, but it's much better to participate. And they never really understood why this didn't work. And there's lots of dead projects. And if you have an idea and you find a dead project, you need to see why do you think that you can do this better. most of the projects that are dead is because the persons who did originally, even if they could get users on it, they couldn't find a way to get money on it. And open source, even if we can have better ideas out in the public, we don't survive if we don't get money for it. Everybody who's doing open source is getting money from someone. In Linux environments, it's easy because you have so many companies embedding Linux and getting a free advantage when you're selling your hardware or your software. So it makes sense that you optimize or help optimize Linux for your solutions. And that's what Linux is evolving. For small projects, that doesn't happen. And when creating an open source product, you have to remember that you get a lot of benefits from open source, but only if you can also create a community around it. And you only create a community by making it really, really easy for others to participate, either participating in coding or using or helping you with the manual or getting it into other products. So with MySQL, it's quite a complex project, and we did get some small patches to the server, but not many, and most of the people who gave us patches we hired eventually. So most of the project was actually coded by me and my core team. And I'm still coding, by the way, if somebody wondering. I like to code. So I try to spend 50% of my time coding MariaDB, and actually just now coding one of the most important features that we have in 10.0. But apart from that, you need to make it easy. And what we gained in MySQL was that even if we only got few features, we got language binding to almost every existing computer languages that we didn't have to do ourselves or keep up to date. We would never be able to add bindings to Common Lisp, to Ruby. I did to Perl and PHP, the initial version, but I didn't have to keep them up. The community took over and kept them up. So we did win a lot. And you also need to have a good team. Just releasing the code and expecting people to start developing it will not work. When you need to establish leaders who people can communicate with, who would help you with developing the product and understanding it. And you also need to educate them how to write good code. You need to find and create passionate users, because that's the only way you can get things forward. When you're working in open source, you're not paying your developers outside. Sometimes you can invite them to a conference. But to get them to work for free, they need to know what to expect of you. I usually say that the currency in open source, it's not money, it's transparency. If they know where you're going or what you're doing and they can participate, you will have a user base that will trust you and will continue to work with you. But that also means extremely clear guidelines for everyone. So I have, on all the slides, I have lots of things that you need to think about. You basically have to do every single thing of what I said on all these slides to be successful. And you can do less, but then you become less successful. And if you want to know more, you can always email me and I can go through things. And you need to really communicate with your users. Listen to what they are saying, like we just heard about from Microsoft that the customers is king, the users is king is open source. But there's lots of confused kings, and sometimes you have to help them see the light. But you need to treat them as kings, that even if you are telling them to go to hell, they need to look forward to the trip. And I believe that one of the most important things is that you need to answer questions. During the first years of MySQL, I personally answered 30,000 questions, just helping users with problems, explaining things, getting people both using the code and using the product. And I believe that without those emails, MySQL would never have been as popular as it was today. And even now with MariaDB, we have a forum and knowledge base, and we do our best to ensure that every single questions that are asked is answered. And I haven't seen at any point in time more than 10 unanswered questions. And if you look at most projects, closed source, open source today, you will see thousand questions, usually the same questions repeated over and over again, and you really have to search to find answers. If you want to be successful, answer everything. And you need also to learn to be a good open source citizen. And that just means helping others, ensure that people are behaving good in your community. You need to create a community that works. And I spent a lot of time during the first 5 years to ensure that you treated people like right on the email list. If somebody was saying bad things about somebody else, either a person or product, I personally went in and had email discussions with those two and said that either you behave or I will throw you out from the group. So there's lots of mantras for open source. One of the most important one, if you have something that you think should be released as open source, don't think about that you need to clean up the code or add some features before you release. You release it, and then you tell your potential users, here's what you got, here's what we're going to do in the future, here's what to expect. And then you just continue to do releases. After you have done a couple releases and actually users see that things are going, as you tell them that you're going and you go in the right direction, they will trust you and start using you and even helping you. As long as you make it easy. Actually, there was one point that I didn't stress out, that when you do a release, the help you get from the open source is not that you get a lot of developers initially. You get a lot of users if you have products that are useful to others, but it will take a long time before you get any patches from developers. So assume when you do a release that you get better bug reports, but it will take years before you get patches. Don't count on it. If you're successful, you may get sooner. And the reason is that before a person starts to help you with the product, he needs to first use it, trust it, think this is really, really good. But it lacks this one feature I need for my job, my project, or something else. And it's easier for him to change the product and add the feature than to switch to something else. When you come to that stage, that's when you get more developers. But that also means that he has to use it first. So that was kind of most of the lessons about how to do an open source project. The rest is how to do business on open source. And there's lots of people who are evangelizing open source and telling that this is the right way to do software. And it's the philosophy of open source. What they don't tell you is that there is no guarantee that you will make any money on open source, except on consulting. And when they talk about and try to prove that you can make money on open source, they usually talk about Red Hat or MySQL and just say that there's a way to do money, but it's not our job to tell you how to do it. You will figure it out. The problem is that most people don't figure out, and that's why we have so many dead open source projects. So I'm trying to help you figure it out. But first, there are different kinds of open source projects. The first are the ones who are developed by a community, like Linux. I know with MariaDB, we actually have Google also participating in development. So we have big companies who are helping and enhancing the product. Then you also have the project that are tools in a company that you just release and you get help of creating a better infrastructure that you can use. But as an investor, I'm mostly concerned about the companies or people who have a nice product, they would like to make money on it, they really believe in open source, but they can't see how can we release this as open source and actually survive. And that's the persons that I'm most concerned about, and this talk is about. But before you start thinking about the product, you need to think about the company. What kind of company are you planning to create? With MySQL, it was a company where we tried to make a profit for investors and founders, and we were quite successful in doing that. And when I went out from Sun and created MySQL, I didn't need to make more money on MySQL, but I needed to ensure that the product survives and that the core engineers that have spent so much time creating MySQL would have a good home. So I did create something called the hacking business model, which is company of equals, where you have nobody who will get more money than others if you're successful. And all the rules are so that people feel that they are in the same position as anybody else. So if you are a group of guys and girls and developers who want to do something and think to do something where everybody should have equal share, look at the hacking business model. Public document, free to use, open source, it tells you all the steps what you need to do. And we have used that in Monty Program AB for 4 years, exactly that, it works perfectly. And then you need to see that you want to concentrate on services or development, and do you have to plan to actually compete with the big closed source guys on somewhat equal terms when it's come to getting money. And you also need to think that you do want to do this with investors or without. I mean, we are at a startup conference, and most people here want to really get more money and get investors and succeed. And this is probably the most important slide if you want to do business, both in open source and in closed source. So you have basically 2 ways to drive a company. You could do a service company where you do a consulting, training, and subscription around the company. And that's what most companies have tried to do in open source. And that's why we don't have enough companies succeeding with open source and getting investors, because in this case, if you earn 1 million, the company is worth 2 million in the investor's eyes. But if you can get license income, your company will, with 1 million of revenue, be worth 10 million. And this is the reason open source companies fails. So in Finland, we have an institution called Tech that gives loans to startups and actual contributions sometimes. I don't think they have done more than a handful of contributions at all to open source companies, because they don't believe that they would succeed. With MySQL, I didn't get anything from Tech. With MariaDB, we had got 1 small contribution from them. But that job was just because of my history. And you also need to decide what's the final goal of the company. And when you talk about startups who are trying getting investors, you basically have 2 options: sold in the market or going public. And just by getting investors in, they will force you to go to either of those. Another option is to take in angels investors, some friends who will loan you money, and they may be happy that you pay them back with interest over time. But that's very, very uncommon. And you can't really become really, really big by doing that. So why go open source if it's so hard? Because you can actually compete on different terms than closed source companies. And that's the reason we went open source with MySQL. Both because we want to help people, we also wanted to show that you can compete with Oracle and win a big segment of the market. And the European Commission concluded that MySQL owns about 80% of the advanced client server market. So clearly we succeeded. And we could never have done that if it wouldn't be open source. And you get lots of, it's much lower cost to do it. You get development than elsewhere. You get more features and more help and more spread than you can get otherwise. There's lots of reasons why people, users, trust open source. The biggest reason is probably that you have no vendor lock-in. You can be sure that in almost all cases, if a product will be continued to be developed if there's a big user base. Like with MySQL and now with MariaDB, even if and when Oracle stops developing MySQL, we will be there with MariaDB, so you don't have to do any changes. And we are binary compatible, so moving from MySQL to MariaDB just takes seconds. Everything works better and faster than before. So there's no vendor locking, in spite of what vendor may do. And you can also be sure that there is no hidden trapdoors. Linux has lately been telling the press that he has been contacted by authorities in the US who wanted backdoors in Linux, and he has stopped that. And it's incredibly hard to get in backdoors in something where there are lots of developers working on, because there are people checking every single commit. There's no chance the backdoors can get in. And if they are there, they will be found very, very soon. For developers, you have access to the code, you can do anything, you are not locked in. If there's a feature missing, you can add it. There's lots of freedom in open source. And for business and countries like Ukraine, and could be, you are not there yet, but like Brazil, they are trying to be independent of other countries like USA. So they are promoting a lot of open source because they only have to pay for things once, and that's when they develop it. After that, it's free. So in Finland, we also have some laws who said that the government always needs to consider open source before buying software. Unfortunately, the closest vendor still has ways to go around that, but we hope to get those holes closed over time. So when to go open source? It's really a business decision for most, assuming we are talking about a small company with a product who wants to make it big. If you think that you can actually get more money by going open source, and you need to think on the money, it's also good that you can do something to create a better world. And I love the fact that with MySQL, we had that 1 in 1,000 paid. And we did know that we're helping 999 persons use something they could never have got before, but we still get enough money for us, because when you have millions of users, actually 1 in 1,000 paying is a good deal. So there are a couple of things you need to think about when going to open source. The first important one is the license, because the license will decide, can you get license income? As was said on the previous slides, you critically need a way to force a small segment of users to pay. Otherwise, you will not get investors, you will not be able to get money for development. So these are the 5 licenses, that open source licenses, that you need to think about. There are more, but using something else will just confuse your users. And public domain is the one most free, and in the sense that you can do anything with it. Same thing with BSD and Apache. LGPL means that if you have useful libraries, is that you can freely use closed source commercial company with the LGPL library, but you have to release any changes to the library. While GPL means that if you are combining your closed source product and link that with a GPL, everything has to be GPL. So in other words, it forces the vendor to become open source if you're using GPL. And with MySQL, we were the first company who realized that, hey, we can do business on this. Because closed source vendors don't want to release their code. And MySQL was something that they actually wanted to use. So we did our money on dual licensing by saying that if you don't want to be open source, you can pay us. You get the identical code, but under not GPL, and then you can use it. And that's how we got more than half of our money with MySQL. So if you want to do business open source, these are the options that you have. I haven't seen anything else. during the last 15, 20 years. Open core is something that lots of people are talking about. I will soon say why it doesn't work or why is it not good for anyone. Dual licensing, like we did with MySQL, it works for some kind of products, unfortunately not for all. I recently introduced to the public the idea about business source, and that's something that I'm personally believing is the way that anyone can make money on open source. And then you have service models and subscriptions, where subscription means that you get basically an agreement, service agreement, where you get money each year from your vendors. But I will go to each of those in detail. So open core means that you have a part of your code is open source, anybody can use it. But then you combine it with something else that is not open source. And usually you have some things that you try to get a part of your user group to really need, because only when they are needing these parts you can get them to pay. But that also means that that if you need these closed-source parts, you're bound with a product and you lose every single advantage of open source. You can't fix bugs anymore. If the vendor goes out of business, you can't use the product anymore. You can change the licensing. Anything can happen. So personally, I believe that open core is a good business model for some, and if that's the only way you can make business, please do it. But remember that this is not open source. It has nothing to do with open source. This is a closed source business model. And the biggest problem I see with open core is that those who are speaking about it are trying to present this as an open source model when it isn't. Dual licensing, GoScript was the first one who had used that and we were the second that we know about who used dual licensing. We were the first one who used that together with GPL. It works if you own all the code and you are an infrastructure product or a library that commercial products want to embed and can get money on embedding. And it works because there's companies who doesn't want to use GPL, so they will pay you for getting rid of it. So this is the second most important slide here today, and this I hope will get more companies to be involved in open source. So first, business source or delayed open source. It's not an open source business model in the sense that it doesn't fulfill and it's not intended to fill the definition of open source. But it has for the users and companies using it most of the benefits on open source, but still allowing you to get money from a certain group so you can create a company, get investors. So the idea is very simple, is that all the code is available, you can do changes in any way as a user, you can develop it, fix bugs, distribute it. All that is free. But when those who use that, in some scenario that you as the owner of the code defines, you say that you have to pay. For example, it will be database, you could say that if you have more than 100 users or 100 paying users, or you are using more than 1 terabyte of data, then you have to pay for the license. So you force a small part of your user group to pay, and it's up to you as the owner to decide which part. And why this is related to open source is that at the same time you say that on this date everything becomes open source. GPL, BSD, Apache, whatever you decide. So that means that the users of a business source license program knows that even if you go out of business, I can continue using the product, I can do a fork. For some years, in some constraints, I have to pay for using that, but then I'm free. So it's much better than open source because it will generate open core, because it actually will generate more open source in the future. And it also allows you to get enough money so you can hire more developers, and you will get investors for this because you have a fraction of your user base who you can get to pay, those who can afford it. And I usually tell people who are thinking about that what you should do is that let people in the beginning use your product for free, and when they expand and they actually start to earn a lot of money when they're using your product, then they can afford to pay, and then you should get them to pay. That's not more than fair. And the nice thing I like with Business Source, it forces good behavior, because people who are using it knows that after 3 years or 5 years, the code will be free. So how do you avoid persons to switch to the free version? By doing frequent releases, add more features, so that people always want to use the latest release. And for each release your users are using, for that release you get 3 or 5 more years to do development. And also the thing that it helps you that if you are afraid that would happen with your product, like with MySQL, that a bad company who had not necessarily have the best interest of your product in mind, you know that after some years you can take it back and continue with it, because it's then open source. You maybe not be able to do Business Source on it again because you don't own all the code, but you can ensure the product survive. So people have asked me, so if I would do MySQL again and knowing what I do know, what would I do differently? Looking back of all the steps that we did right and wrong, I can't find any single point in time where we could have done better based on the information that we had back then. We could have done a little bit better, but not something we could foresee. And the one thing I missed was that I never believed that we would sell MySQL to somebody who would have not MySQL's best interest in mind. And we did have some control. Oracle actually put a bid on MySQL just before we were planning to go public. And we really didn't have any plans to sell to them. And Sun gave a better bid, so we kind of thought that was a good thing. But I never expected that Sun would be bought by Oracle. So the one thing I should have done, I should have done Business Source on MySQL and said that the code is GPL, but after 5 years it's BSD. Then Oracle would never have bought MySQL. And we wouldn't be in the trouble with MySQL that we are now. So recommendations for Business Source. Depending on your business and how often you do releases, that it should be 3 or 5 years before it becomes free. And you should target so that most of your users can use you for free, because even if this is not open source, if people can use it for free, they can change it, they can fix bugs, they get all the freedoms that open source gives them, they will be happy. And most people understand that a company needs money to improve the product, so they will not feel bad that somebody has to pay as long as it's not them when they can't afford it. And that's the problem with the commercial licenses today. Oracle 11G and 12G is really, really expensive. And if you have a small company that with a couple of developers, you can't afford it. And unfortunately, we have better alternatives today, but we don't have that for all software. By getting more people interested and using Business Source, we can. So there's lots of information on the net about Business Source. Now basically all generated during the last few months. Here's some links that you can look at. Just get the slides from IDCEE. And we also have Fred Trotter, who I met at OSCON some months ago, who's also trying to do something similar. So I will try to coordinate with him to create some common documents of how it works. And my blog will actually have a link to academic article I and a guy named Linus from Finland wrote that explains this in more detail. I also have a snippet that you can just cut and use for your product, so you can get a license that works, and it's checked by a lawyer. And there's also lots of confusion when this was released, because people thought that we will use this for MariaDB, which we can't because we don't own the source. the idea about business source is to allow me and other investors find more customers, or actually companies who have an interesting product that is partly open source and can get a big community and lots of users and compete with closed source companies. I want to invest into companies, and by helping them, we can do that. And the most important thing from my part of view is that without doing dual licenses, MySQL would never have been possible. We've never been able to hire. In the end, we were more than 120 developers in the company, of which 20 worked on MySQL. We could never do that by just doing services. And companies are cheap. If they can use your product for free, they will do that. You need to force them to pay. So that was it, sir. I assume I don't have time for questions. Any questions? I'm also here the rest of the day, so and after the talk, so just seek me out if you have any desires to know more, or if you have a business that you think could use this. So I've been talking about this now for the last half year. It's lots of conferences, and I have been happy to see there's lots of companies who are thinking about switches to a business source, already switched. Not many, but still 10. And that's a good thing, because we'll get more people involved in open source this way. So I'm happy with that. Okay, thank you.